Careful what you say. Several years ago, a lady named Brenda Baumhart-Mez allowed me to scan several scrapbooks of her family photographs. For persons unfamiliar with them, the Vermilion Baumhart family was once upon a grand old time, one of the town's most prominent families. One might note, however, that there were several sides to this family. One that settled in the Brownhelm area and spelled their name with the letter D toward the end. Baumhardt, and Brenda's more immediate ancestors who settled in Vermilion proper and who in time, spelled the name without the extra letter. Augustus was the patriarch of the Vermilion family. He was born in Hessen-Kassel, Germany in 1834. Sometime during the mid-1850s, Mr. Baumhart and his wife Margaret left Europe and settled in Vermilion, where the couple operated a dairy farm. Together they had 8 children, 5 boys and 3 girls. And life was apparently quite good to them. He died in August of 1894. The Baumhart boys, Henry, Charles, Otto, George and Albert, did quite well for themselves and their respective families. However, all but Albert died rather young. When the eldest son, Henry, was stricken by flu and died at the tender age of 59 in 1922, he was the manager of the Cleveland department of the Hartford Steam Boiler Inspection Insurance Company. Charles, C.C., was a most intelligent and enterprising person. As a very young man, he owned and operated a drugstore business in Vermilion while simultaneously dabbling in local real estate. However, a congenital heart condition stole his life at age 44. The third oldest son, Otto, who was also interested in steam boilers, became an engineer on the Nickel Plate Railroad. But, again, also died relatively young, age 57, in 1926. Brother George never left the farm, was successful, and had an inherent passion for politics. He was a highly respected member of the Vermilion Village Council when he joined his older brothers in eternity in 1923. He was 51. Albert, the remaining brother, who had been a rather sickly youth, followed his brother, C.C., into the drugstore business and was, of course, very successful. He also became involved in the town's first telephone exchange, the first motion picture theater, i.e. the Crystal Theater, the first ticket agency for the Lake Shore Electric Interurban Railway, and last but hardly least, operated an extremely successful ice cream manufacturing and sales business. A.D. and his first wife, Effie Washburn, were the proud parents of 2 sons, A.D. Jr. and Charles. Toward the end of World War I, Effie fell victim to the Great Flu pandemic, then overshadowing the world, and died at 35 years of age. In 1921, Mr. Baumhart married a lady named Frances Bullock. Now the photograph. More often than not, it is quite hard to follow family relationships beyond our own, and following the Baumhart tree is no different. But perhaps the accompanying photo will help. Pictured at the back, left to right, are Peter Hart, A.D. Baumhart and Emma Hart. In the front row left to right are Frances Baumhart and Bertha Wood. Now, the relationships. Peter Hart was the husband of Emma Baumhart, who was one of A.D. Baumhart's older sisters. Peter was a ship's carpenter as well as a bridge carpenter for the railroad. Bertha Wood was the middle child of Peter and Emma Hart. Her older brother was named Albert Henry, and her younger sister was Alice. Albert Henry Hart and his wife Emily, married in 1915, had 2 children. Albert H., aka Jim, and a daughter they named Jane. The elder Albert was a Vermilion pharmacist and opened and operated Vermilion's iconic Hart's Corner drugstore, now Big Jim's Soda Grill, in the very heart, no pun intended, of town. The younger Albert also became a pharmacist as well as becoming one of the town's most highly respected businessmen and citizens. Today the name Baumhart is not as well known as it once was, but the Hart name remains prominent. Peter Hart, son, grandson, and great-grandson etc. still makes Vermilion his home. And there are undoubtedly other members of these families about, with names not so obvious that pass along the streets. So in this instance let me caution all. Be careful what you say about someone. You may be talking to her or his relative. It's a small town. Ref. Special thanks to Brenda Baumhart Mez. Published in the Vermilion Photojournal June 15, 2017. Copyright Rich Tarrant.
June 8, 1951. The Tom Thumb Wedding in Vermilion, Ohio. Introduction to the Emprise. A Tom Thumb wedding is a pageant where children act out a marriage ceremony. They became popular in the late 19th century, inspired by the 1863 wedding of General Tom Thumb, a dwarf who was born Charles Sherwood Stratton in Connecticut in 1838, and another little person some called the Little Queen of Beauty, Lavinia Warren, who was born in Massachusetts in 1842. These plays have been put on for community crowds in America for over a century, and believe it or not, continue to be performed today in various places. The pageant takes its name and inspiration from the real wedding of Sherwood and Lavinia. It took place in a posh New York ceremony in 1863. It was nicknamed the Fairy Wedding. The wedding was such a sensation it knocked Civil War news off the New York Times front page for 3 days straight. Mr. Stratton was a gifted performer who became the major attraction for circus impresario P.T. Barnum during the 19th century. He would sing, dance, perform a riotous pantless routine where he impersonated Grecian statues, and commanded the fancy of women the world over, to whom he swore he was a general in Cupid's artillery. It is estimated that over 4 decades, he performed for more than 50 million people in 24 countries, including a performance for British Queen Victoria. Tom Thumb's extraordinary wedding would ironically prove to be his legacy, though certainly not in the way he or anyone else would have expected. He died in 1883, and the idea of a theatrical child wedding be performed as his memorial began not long after.
I know not who or why it was decided to hold such a pageant in the little village of Vermilion, Ohio back in 1951. But, as one may surmise by the accompanying photograph taken at Vermilion's South Street School, it certainly did take place. What I also know is that at least 80 Vermilion children were in attendance. Tommy Roberts was the groom and Nancy Ludlow was the bride. The maid of honor was Elsie Gould. Best man was Stuart Warner. Bridesmaids were Jackie Jeffrey, Ellen Barth and Dana Buell. Ushers were Jim Green, Russ Mose and Joe King. The ring bearer was David Fisher, who was only 4 years and 7 months old at the time. The bride's parents were Kathy Dickinson and Billy Ream, and the groom's parents were Susie Rathbun and Russ Cool. I also know that out of a list of the 80 wedding participants there are only 6 names that I don't recognize. I have 2 cousins, Noreen Welch and Janet Lindsay, and a sister, Zella Butchie, in the entourage. And there are many others whose names many persons will easily recognize. Dave Buell, Ken McDaniel, Bobby Neller, Howard Bogart, Eric Amon, Kathleen Grant, Sandy Derby, Judy Shaw, Noreen Peterka, Judy Creel, Linda Russell, Barb Hayes, Joan Wolodarski, Jackie Vassbinder, Lance Warner, Russ Fisher, Barb Wiseman, Frankie Zeckley, Alan, Pete, Needing, Bobby Green, Larry Niddle, Bob Noltner, Jimmy Fisher, Dave Birch, Don Kress, Mike Havrilla, Ron Lashinsky, Shirley Malone, Susan Height, Tommy Boone, Janet Watson, Meredith Raprick, Mary Lee Russell, Carol Locks, Sandy Yeamans, Linda Peck, Paul Wood, Suzanne Birch, Ada Greenhoe, Bev Heyman, Bob Fackler, Steve Mayer, Eldon Peck, Karen Hollowsy and Dave Haley. Although many of these children were my contemporaries, I was obviously excluded from the affair. Looking back, I don't feel slighted in the least by not being included in the pageant. I'm actually relieved some, even as I look at this photograph. For it was not my proverbial coup d'etat then or now. However, I do vividly recall that during that period of my life I had the propensity to contract every childhood illness that existed, and late May and early June being the worst times to be suffering with mumps or measles seemed to be precisely when I had them. I can remember lying morose in bed and listening to the neighbor kids just outside my window, having all kinds of fun because summer vacation had finally arrived. Well, a good deal of water has passed under the bridge since Tom Thumb's wedding in Vermilion. And though I was not in attendance, I look over the faces in the photo with a smile on my face. Gosh, how I loved those kids in those days, and how lucky I am to have known them. Not only as they were then, but also as the persons they became. I guess that's one of the benefits of being born and growing old in a small town. December 25, 2019.
Hey everybody, Rich Tarrant here in the studio atop the wonderful Vermilion History Museum. It's Monday morning, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this photograph on my desktop here. As some of you already know or recognize, it's the Goody Goody Bar down on Liberty next to Folpers, back in the 50s. I'm going to guess that this is around 1957. This was a hangout, well, maybe not a hangout, but a place to go after going to the Liberty Theater on Friday and Saturdays. And kids would all come in and get hot dogs and hamburgers and sundaes and everything. This was really a neat place. It really didn't last that long. I think probably by 1958 or 59 it was gone. But a nice picture, and I'm glad we have it to look at and remember sometimes. Looking at it now, I can't exactly, I think somewhere I may have a few pictures of the interior. But looking at it right now, what I'm noticing over here in this left window, which is homemade ice cream, that barrel back there, that's a root beer barrel. I know that. I really liked that root beer. It was cold. That was a refrigerated barrel. This was a good idea. I have a picture of the guy and his wife who owned it, and I have a picture also of the Wiseman girls. You can see that Folpers had built on by this time. They built on a little bit to their business. The restaurant that's set over here to the right, where I'm pointing, you can see part of Folpers there where it says tried boron, yet question mark. Okay, Folpers had added already to their business. We're starting up with the auto parts store in this year, and that old air pump is still sitting there. They just moved it over, I guess, is all they did. But the building, the restaurant that was there prior to this time was torn down. So this sat directly next to the Liberty Theater. You can see the billboard for the theater over here. This building, and I talked about it in the other photo that I used last week, this building was actually a two-storefront store originally. You can see the two windows here, and I think they probably would cut it right down the middle of that door there, and there's a door here and a door there. On the right was my grandmother's gift shop, the news gift shop that my aunt inherited when my grandmother died. And on the left was Western Union, which you could still use Western Union, but it's not as necessary. It's not as familiar to us now as it was in those years. Or it was even becoming less familiar during this time, or it'd still be in that store. I'm glad I have this picture. Let me put it that way. I would think I might have been 12, 13, about this when this was taken. I remember going to the theater, and I remember going in there. All the kids were in there, all the girls, all the boys. And I remember there was a dollar bill that one of the black, I think not Mylan, Bernie Black, one of them, whether it was Bernie or Mylan, was a real good artist. And he drew a dollar bill, and it was in a frame on the wall in that restaurant. You look back and you wish you had all those things that you see, and they're gone, just like this entire building. You kind of wish that it was still there so you could go in and check out your memories. But we do have this picture, and I'm glad we do. I can hear the music still from those years. Very nice.